Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our council meeting of November 22nd, our first official meeting as new council. And I want to welcome all of the councillors here today to start this journey. We do apologize. We are about 15 minutes late. Some technical difficulties, but we have been able to fix that. So with that, can I please have the calling of the roll, clerk?
Mayor Sidney.
Present.
Reeve Eamon.
Present.
Councillor Sobalski.
Present.
Councillor Dick.
Present.
Councillor Legree.
Present.
Councillor McDonald.
Present.
And Councillor McWhirter.
Present.
Mayor Sidney, we have quorum.
Thank you very much. On to our land acknowledgement. As we gather, we would like to acknowledge on behalf of Council and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history, and we are extremely grateful for the many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Can I please have everybody rise for O Canada? On to B of our agenda, declaration of interest. I don't think we have any today. Presentations, delegation, announcements. Council orientation, general overview. I'll hand that over to the CAO and his team.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we know, Council will have, we've decided to spread out Council orientation over our next set of meetings over the next couple of months. This one is the first one, very high overview, and I'll be joined by Victoria Charbonneau, our clerk, Carolyn Ard, our deputy clerk, and Aaron Broom, our treasurer. And we'll be sending an update on the schedule for the upcoming Council orientation. So should just note that this is a lot of information that you'll be asked to digest over the next little while. We hope that doing it in this fashion will allow you some time to understand these complex issues and legislation, and same with the members of the public, so they have a true understanding of how local government works and all the constraints that comes with that in terms of the legislation. So I'll start this session, and I think we were provided a hard copy of the slide deck, and I also emailed you the slides. The slides will be added to the agenda as well for the members of the public that are following along. What we'll cover today is really some real basic stuff in terms of the Municipal Act. We'll also touch on the Council Code of Conduct and the Council Staff Relations Policy, two things that are required under legislation. We'll also cover the Workplace Violence, Harassment, Sexual Harassment, and Discrimination Policy. You play an important role as the employer, so in terms of our responsibilities to our staff and our environment under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, so we'll go over quickly what that policy entails. We'll also touch on the delegation of authority policy, and the Municipal Act speaks about delegation. And then we'll be joined, the clerk's team will cover off some quick highlights on the procedural bylaw. And as we go through a number of meetings, you will kind of get a better understanding of the procedural bylaw. So the Municipal Act is a large piece of legislation, and it is the legislation that covers municipal governance and operations. And I want you to I'm going to pass this over to Victoria, who's going to go over some kind of key components of the Act that speak to kind of the broad authority that municipalities do have.
Thank you, CAO Tremblay. So as you can see in your slide deck, we've got a few key legislation sections within the Act. To draw your attention to Section 2, municipalities are created by the Province of Ontario to be responsible and accountable governments with respect to matters within their jurisdiction. So as a municipality, we're given powers and duties under this Municipal Act and along with many other acts. For example, a timely example would be the Municipal Elections Act. We were governed by that piece of legislation to roll out our election in a certain fashion. And also, you'll hear, I'm sure, quite frequently as your term on council proceeds, the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection and Privacy Act. Again, just two examples of acts that we are also governed by. And Section 5, powers of municipality shall be exercised by its council, and anything begun by one council may be continued and completed by succeeding councils. So you as a new incoming council are within your legislative abilities to continue on the good work of our previous council. And number 3, a municipal power, including a municipality's capacity, rights, powers, and privileges, shall be exercised by bylaw, unless the municipality is specifically authorized to do so otherwise. So at each and every council meeting, we are passing a series of bylaws to enforce the regulations and laws that we are putting down for our town, and the ones that we are also legislatively required to do so under this Municipal Act. Section 8, the powers of a municipality shall be interpreted broadly under the Act. So that essentially gives the municipality a lot of traction and authority to exercise its powers within the legislation to the best of its, to govern its affairs that it sees appropriate and enhance the municipality's ability to respond to municipal issues in a way that you all see fit. Section 9, a municipality has the capacity, rights, and powers and privileges of a natural person for the purpose of exercising its authority under this or any other act. So when you're exercising this act, you're not seen as a legal entity, you're functioning as a natural person under the eyes of the legislation. And then to move along through the Act, there are 3 types of municipalities. So as it's listed here, there's a single tier, and again, there's a few examples included there. For example, Pembroke, the city of Pembroke is a single tier. They function outside of the county of Renfrew. Upper tier, county of Renfrew is an example. Lower tier would be us, town of Renfrew, and that's how we function within the 3 types of municipalities. We are a part of the upper tier, which is county of Renfrew. The spheres of jurisdiction, so again, it's in section 11. So this is in the matter in which we operate. So bylaws dealing with the following matters. There's a list there, and that's a general high-level list. I'll just highlight a few. For example, we have the ability to set bylaws dealing with governance, structure of the municipality and its local boards. So what we're going through today, our procedural bylaw, and what we'll see moving forward in our future council meetings, the structure of our local boards and committees. Accountability and transparency of the municipality and its operations and of its local boards and their operations. Financial management, economic, social, and environmental well-being of the municipality, including respect to climate change, which we are legislated to do so. Health, safety, and well-being of persons. Services and things that the municipality is authorized to provide. This is outlined in various other acts with legislation attached to that. And protection of persons, properties, and including consumer protection. So we have various bylaws, such as our transient trader bylaws that require anyone who is operating within our town that doesn't have a storefront and pay taxes, they have to adhere to a certain amount of rules and pay a fee to operate safely. And there's legislation within our bylaw that requires due diligence on our part to make sure they're operating in a safe manner. So continuing on through the spheres of jurisdiction, we also have bylaws including what you'll see it coming out of a lot of our committees. We have waste management, we do economic development services, business licensing, and a few other things such as public utilities, culture, parks, recreation, heritage, etc. So there's no exclusive jurisdiction to the county in these areas. Economic development, which we have full-time EDO staff, and then highways and transportation are also shared with the county of Renfrew.
Thanks, Victoria. And just on natural person powers, because I know everybody's, well, what's that about? It allows us to enter into agreements, just like any entity. So it allows the mayor and the clerk to enter into agreements. So some that you will see coming forward are the pool agreement with the town of Arnprior needs to be renegotiated. You'll see that. The agreement with junior A hockey will come forward. Leases for tenants at Mattaway. Those are all kind of legal binding agreements that were were deemed natural persons for the purpose of being able to do that. The next slide, I think, is pretty foundational. When I was hired in one of my interviews, I shared a very similar slide, and I think it's important to note those roles because implementing a CAO model and having senior staff, we have a role to play, and it's not your role. And I think staff need to understand that we're not council, you are, and really respect that role, but at the same time understand that staff do have a role to play so that everybody is really clear on what each is to do. So I'll go through the ones that are outlined for council, and these are kind of the bread and butter of your role here, is to represent and consider the well-being and interests of the public. That's assigned to you, that's your important role. So that means people will call you, people will stop you in the grocery store. They will give you their opinion on the budget, on a specific project. That's within your role, and you're to kind of keep that in mind when you're deliberating as part of being a member of council. You're to develop and evaluate policies and programs. Oftentimes, you're directing staff on the programs you're looking to see and the policies that you want to develop. So it's kind of small p policies, not capital P policies. Usually staff are the ones doing that work, but doing that work based on the direction that you're providing. You are to determine the services and the service levels. So does that mean do we have sidewalks on both sides of the street on every road? Do we have them on one side? Is Mattaway not open on Sundays? Services and service levels, and do we have an organics program? We don't. But say council decides in its wisdom that we should, after we tell you how much it's going to cost. But essentially that's council's role, is to really determine the level of service. So staff can't say, hey, we're getting rid of all the benches on this road. That would be broadly defined as a service level, and that's really council's role to determine the levels of service. In terms of the big P policies, you're to ensure that there's administrative and controllership policies, practices, and procedures are in place. It is staff's role to make sure those things are done, but council has an oversight role to make sure that those things are being done. You're to ensure the accountability and transparency of the operations, including the work of senior managers. So we have by broadcasting our meetings, by posting documents to our website, that's all part of the accountability and transparency piece. And the legislation puts that in your court. What we do is we facilitate the tactical way of doing that. You have a duty to ensure the financial integrity of the corporation. We won't go through the whole section of the Municipal Act that speaks to finance. Aaron will just have one slide on some key pieces of it. But council's overriding role is to make sure that the finances are, the integrity of the finances. That does not mean you're an auditor. You're not the municipal auditor. We'll talk about the municipal auditor later. It doesn't mean that you craft the budget, the treasurer crafts the budget based on your direction, but it does mean that you're aware of the finances and you ask the questions that need to be asked. And then other duties as assigned, I'm sure we all love that in our job descriptions and our other lives, but other duties as assigned by other pieces of legislation. The role of the head of council, and there's some legislation you may have heard of, it only applies to larger places, Ottawa and Toronto for now, and Ottawa has said they don't want the powers. But there is what they call the head of council is a CEO. If you've worked in the private sector, it does not mean what you think CEO means. It does, though, in the Act spell out what they mean by that. So it means uphold and promote the purposes of the municipality, promote public involvement, represent the town locally and externally, participate and foster activities that enhance the economic, social, and environmental well-being of the municipality and its residents. So the mayor has a very important role in terms of being the spearhead of the town, but also being its kind of broad ambassador in terms of being a spokesperson, but also representing the town inside the town, but also outside its boundaries. Now for the role of officers and employees. Our role is to implement your decisions. So we give you the best advice we can. You might like it, you might not like it, you might ask us to go and do more research on stuff, but when you make a decision, our role is to implement it. It's not like, well, I'll implement that later when they notice that I didn't implement it. No, our role, and part of being in public service is, our role is to implement what the decisions of council. And we do that through the establishment of administrative practices and procedures. As I said, we're there to undertake research and to provide you our best advice. And I'll just note too, and we'll talk about the treasurer a little later, but you are required to have a clerk. You're not required to have a CAO, but the clerk records resolutions, decisions, and proceedings of council, takes votes, keeps bylaws, and other duties as assigned and in law. And I should say that there are many pieces of legislation that speak to the important role of the clerk. My role as CAO is to exercise general control of the management of the affairs of the municipality, and I'm to do that with the sole intended purpose of ensuring we're as efficient and effective as possible in its operations. So that is the driving role and responsibility of the CAO, is to really play a coordinating role and to make sure the operations of the place are in order and are as effective and efficient as possible. And I know that Reeve read my master's dissertation on the role of the CAO. I won't share it with you, but you could Google it. But it speaks to how CAOs are able to accomplish that. And oftentimes, and I think this applies to all staff, we show our value by demonstrating competency. And competency means we put the work in. So when we give you our best advice, you understand it to be the best advice possible. That means we need the time and the resources to be able to do our jobs effectively. But I can give you the commitment that our role is to give you our best advice and to implement your decisions. And I trust that our team, our senior management team, and the whole staff team are there to support you in your role, understanding how important and critical it is in terms of your specific role of representing the municipality, making sure we're accountable, making sure that you have the financial oversight on the matters, and that we're doing what we need to do, and that you're determining the service levels based on the advice we give you. So you're seeing some policies today that I did share with you. That also all comes from the Municipal Act. So Section 270 sets out a series of policies that we're required to have. I've highlighted some that either need to be drafted or need a revision. So some of this we've done recently and others are to come, and you'll see those in we'll talk later about my 25 goals and objectives that I was asked to accomplish, and this fits as part of that, and the clerk's team is working on it as well. So we need policies on the sale and disposition of land, the hiring of employees, which recently we've updated, the relationship between council and employees, and we'll talk about it a little later, the procurement of goods and services, recently updated by the new Treasury team, and we will brief you on that when Finance does a council orientation for you. Public notice. So we have some public notice requirements in our procedural bylaw and in other policies, but we don't have a specific notice policy, which we're mandated to have, so that will come forward. We need a policy on accountability and transparency. Again, we do not have that policy. We have a number of initiatives that we undertake, so that will be another policy piece we will bring forward. The delegation of powers and duties, we'll talk about that tonight. That was recently adopted by the previous council. And the manner in which the municipality will protect and enhance the tree canopy and natural vegetation of the municipality. Kind of doesn't seem to fit with the rest of this list, but we're obligated to have that policy, and I know the environmental staff are working on that. And then pregnancy leaves and parental leaves for members of council. That is also a new obligation that we will make sure we have. I will point out that local boards are mandated to have 3 of these policies: sale of land, procurement, and hiring. So one of our due diligence will be, for instance, with the BIA and other boards that are part of us, is ensuring that they do have those in place, or if they want to adopt a version of our policies. And I was talking about finance, so I'll turn it over to Aaron for just a quick overview of Part 7 of the Act.
Thank you, CAO Tremblay. Section 286 of the Act states that a municipality shall appoint a treasurer who is responsible for handling all of the financial affairs of the municipality on behalf of and in the manner directed by the council of the municipality, and that includes collecting money payable to the municipality and issuing receipts for those payments, depositing all money received on behalf of the municipality in a financial institution designated by the municipality. So collecting money payable would be like taxes and water and general revenues, and then depositing them on a weekly basis into our financial institution, which is Bank of Montreal. The treasurer is responsible for paying all debts of the municipality and other expenditures authorized by the municipality. So on a weekly basis, we do a check run and an EFT run to pay all of our vendors for all of our invoices. I am responsible for maintaining accurate records and accounts of the financial affairs of the municipality, and for providing the council with such information with respect to the financial affairs of the municipality as it requires or requests, and for ensuring that investments of the municipality are made in compliance with the regulations and requirements. Section 290, for each year, a local municipality shall, in the year or the immediately preceding year, prepare and adopt a budget including estimates of all sums required during the year for the purposes of the municipality, including amounts sufficient to pay all debts of the municipality falling due within the year, amounts required to be raised for sinking funds or retirement funds, so this is for our reserves, and amounts required for any board, commission, or other body. So, for instance, that's for the library board, the BIA, the museum, and any boards such as those. Section 294, a municipality shall, for each fiscal year, prepare annual financial statements for the municipality in accordance with GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, for local governments as recommended from time to time by the Public Sector Accounting Board of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada. And a municipality shall appoint an auditor licensed under the Public Accounting Act who is responsible for annually auditing the accounts and transactions of the municipality and its local boards, and expressing an opinion on the financial statements of these bodies based on the audit. And they also perform duties required by the municipality or a local board.
So you will see financial statements for 2021. They will be coming as part of your finance orientation, so you'll see those. So we're required to have an auditor. We're required to provide financial statements. Those financial statements are audited. We will be starting the budget process in January, where we'll have the tabling committee of the whole, and then it's going to go to standing committee. And the Treasury team, which is not a huge team, but are a very hardworking team, undertake the day-to-day transactional items. So, for instance, I'm not involved in the deposits, and I'm not involved in cutting the checks. There's a staff team that are responsible for that. But there is a whole section in the Municipal Act that speaks to the financial administration, taxation, but we just wanted to give you a high-level overview of some of those key things. The 2 major appointments, the treasurer and the auditor, and the financial statements, and the budget that's required on an annual basis. Any questions on the Municipal Act, Mr. Mayor, before we move on to just some other policies? I know it's a high-level one, but I think we just want to hit a few key highlights as we start our journey of council orientation.
Does any member of council have a question for any of these? No, I think we're good.
Okay. So the Council Code of Conduct, again, required by the Municipal Act, So you'll hear about, required by the Municipal Act, as much as you'll hear about my 25 goals and objectives. But we're also required to appoint an integrity commissioner, and our integrity commissioner, Tony Fleming, who's a lawyer out of Kingston, the firm Cunningham Swan. He's been appointed by a number of municipalities in Renfrew County and across Ontario. And Tony will be joining us on February 28th, and we've also tried to set up some time. Part of his duties as integrity commissioner is giving you advice. So if you own a business, or your father owns a business, or your sister owns a business, how does that impact your duties? And you'll be able to seek that advice ahead of time, and he's to provide a letter of advice. And as those items come to council and you declare, or there are questions, you'll have that advice. The integrity commissioner also does investigations and findings and can recommend a reprimand or a loss of salary. But Tony will go through that when he joins us in February. The requirements of the Code of Conduct are actually set out in regulation. So we have legislation, and then sometimes the details of what they're actually requiring of us are set out in regulation. So our Code of Conduct is really very similar to other codes of conduct, and most of those items are set out in the regulation. So just to let you know, these aren't creative writing exercises. Most times it's just us checking the boxes of the regulation or the legislation. So why do we have a code of conduct? So the policy statement purpose says it's to achieve the highest quality of municipal administration and governance with the highest standard of conduct. And we do that to build public trust in our institutions and confidence in the decision-making, but also the operations of the corporation. And there are a number of statutes that provide rules around conduct, and Victoria talked about two, but there's also the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and you'll see that in the Code of Conduct, and Tony will speak to it in the requirements. And that could require, you may have heard in a neighboring rural township in the county, there were 2 complaints. Sometimes you hear some complaints under the Integrity Commissioner, but there's also a legislative framework under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act where you could be brought before a judge should you not follow the requirements of the legislation. Our code applies to council, our local boards, and the committee members. So it does not just apply to council, it also applies to committee members and board members. And a few highlights on general conduct. So because Tony will speak a lot about conflicts of interest and declarations of interest and other matters, I just wanted to highlight the general stuff. I call this the ground rules of respect that we expect from each other, and they're good to kind of start off with. So you're expected to treat members of the public, staff, and each other in a respectful manner without abuse, bullying, harassment, or intimidation. And if you read some of the case law integrity commissioner reports, a lot of them have to do with that first point. It's usually somebody shouted at somebody else, or in some cases ran them off the road because of a disagreement. So it's always important to start with respect. Shall not use indecent, abusive, or insulting words or expressions, shall not speak in a manner that is discriminatory on the basis of race, ancestry, place of origin, creed, gender, sexual orientation, age, color, marital status, or disability. You must act ethically at all times, perform your functions with integrity, accountability, and transparency, comply with legislation, bylaws, and policies. So a policy may come forward, you might be against it, you vote, the power of council is really council as a whole, you were against it. It doesn't mean that you don't have to follow the policy that was enacted by council, so you must follow policy and bylaws. You need to acknowledge the public has a right to open government and transparent decision-making, that you're at the service of the interests of the constituents and approach decision-making with an open mind, and you shall not extend preferential treatment to any individual or organization, and you shall not benefit from the use of information that is not generally available to the public. So you will have access to information in the course of your duties. It might be in closed session, it might be as part of a file you might be involved in. You cannot take access to that information to use it for your own purposes. I'll move into the council staff relations policy, which is kind of interrelated, again required by the Municipal Act. And the policy there is to promote a respectful, tolerant, harassment-free relationship and workplace between members of council and the officers and the employees of the town. So that applies to a summer student helping us out in parks as much as it applies to Director Aslin, who's provided service to the town for decades. It applies to everybody within the organization. And the guiding principles that I think are important is empowerment. So staff are given authority to do our work. With that authority comes support from council and resources, and in some cases, some delegated authority for some decision-making. There's also the guiding principle of professional growth. You want staff that are skilled, know what they're doing, and have the education and the training to be able to do their jobs effectively, and I think that applies to any kind of balanced, productive organization. We foster collaboration and partnership with strong relationships, understanding that we each have different roles to play. We foster respect through fairness and mutual respect. There's the golden rule, which is treat others as you wish to be treated, is a good one to keep in mind. And there's also realistic expectations in terms of timelines, tasks, directions, and goals. I can say that we've moved very quickly in the 5 months that I've been here, and I appreciate kind of council's support to move forward on some stuff, and I appreciate staff kind of sticking with me as we've implemented some stuff, but we will not necessarily be able to accomplish build Rome in a day, and some tasks take longer to achieve. And I think our role when we give you the best advice is to be very kind of realistic in terms of timelines and implementation. And it refers back to the roles, that everybody has different roles to play, and it's important to respect the different roles. Leading into the workplace violence, harassment, sexual harassment, and discrimination policy. So this is two parts: adherence to the Ontario Human Rights Code, but also the Occupational Health and Safety Act that says that employers must ensure that this policy is in place. You may have heard that about legislative changes that came, I'm trying to think if it's 10 or 20 years ago, due to a shooting at OC Transpo where an employee was bullied for a number of years, came into work and shot some colleagues, or a nurse that was killed on the job by an abusive spouse. So those are two cases that really went and updated these requirements, and they apply to employers. The policy is meant to prevent all forms of harassment. Should say that we take harassment extremely seriously, and any complaint or fear or anything that's reported to us that's regarding harassment, we take very seriously, and we have a zero tolerance for it. This policy applies to all municipal employees and all activities that occur on town business, but they also relate to any town activities or any town events. So there's an event we organize, a social for staff, after work, a golf event, and councillors are there and staff are there. Harassment is not allowed there, just as much as it's not allowed outside the treasurer's door Monday to Friday at between 8 and 4 p.m., 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. So acts of harassment and inappropriate behavior are considered serious offenses, and we have a progressive discipline policy that does speak to that. And we are to provide assistance and support, including providing the recourse that's required when a complaint is received. So we have a duty to assist and support our staff, and we have an employee assistance program and other tools that we can provide, but we also have a duty to deal with complaints. And so discrimination, there's a number of protected grounds that are covered under the Ontario Human Rights Code. I mentioned them earlier with the Code of Conduct, but we are, as an organization, we do not tolerate discrimination. So workplace harassment is defined as engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct that is known or ought to be known to be unwelcome, or workplace sexual harassment. So it's a course of action that is known to be unwelcomed and is continuously pursued. So that sometimes can be called bullying, it could be stalking, it could be a number of things, but it's unwanted behavior. The policy also speaks to workplace violence, which is physical force and or physical injury. And the policy and the legislation also cover domestic violence, that nurse who was killed by a doctor who she was previously dating at work. So there's requirements in the policy and in legislation. There's a duty to report. So if we suspect that we have an employee that's a victim of domestic violence, we have to take measures to ensure that that employee is safe in the workplace, which I know goes one step further than people usually recognize, but that is a requirement. So management responsibilities, and I would say this involves the employer. So as CAO, I'm deemed the employer, and so is council. We're to act respectfully towards others, so lead by example. We're to promote a professional workplace, and we're to ensure that the policy is followed and understood. And the policy speaks to complaints and how they're dealt with in an informal way to say, hey, Victoria, I don't like it when you treat me that way. Please stop. Or I go to my supervisor and say, I have a colleague that's been treating me this way. I don't feel good about it. Or a written complaint. And that can result in an investigation, corrective action, and discipline. And there's provisions here about false accusations, non-retaliation, and confidentiality. So any questions on the code, the council staff liaisons policy, or the harassment prevention policy?
Council, any questions?
Great. Delegation of authority policy. Again, per section 23(1) of the Municipal Act. And the policy statement and purpose here is to say it's important to provide clear direction and requirements with regard to delegation of authority. So it's not just what's written in our job descriptions, it could be what's directed in policies. Delegation of authority is appropriate when accompanied with clear reporting requirements, opportunities for council to lift delegation, and limits to that authority. So for instance, we'll talk about the procurement policy. There's some purchases that are within a dollar amount that council approved the budget. We tender it out, it's within that dollar amount, so it's less than 100,000. So we basically went out and bought what you approved us to buy. We can purchase based on the competitive process. So there are limits to authority, and sometimes that's a dollar amount as an example, but it could also be certain matters of a serious nature come to council versus other routine ones that stay with staff. And it's very specific to operational matters, and there needs to be a transparent framework, and the policy aims to be that framework. And council can impose any such conditions and terms as it sees fit. And one key component is regular reporting. So you'll see in the policy that most delegations must be reported to standing committee and council at least semi-annually. That is a way, so even though we do things because we're delegated authority, we were to tell you that we did the things that you delegated to us. So it's not like we go and do stuff and you don't know what's going on. It's meant to be reported back out to council. I'll highlight there's a few key components for different positions, and I'll highlight a few. So my delegation is based on my role as outlined in section 229. And that is the general control of the affairs of the municipality for its efficiency and effectiveness. I'm to develop and evaluate policies and procedures. That doesn't mean I approve policies on my own. You'll see policies come to this table. I'm to coordinate and supervise program and policy implementation. So back to roles, staff's role is implementation. So as CAO, I'm to make sure that implementation is happening. I'm to advise council on the hiring and dismissal of non-management staff. As CAO is essentially spending a lot of time doing HR, any management staff, they're hired or dismissed by council. So we would have a session and closed, or we would inform you you'd be involved with that, but non-management staff is my responsibility. And there's some HR policies that I must follow while doing so. I'm to annually assess the performance of department heads. I'm to appoint, promote, demote, suspend staff subject to HR policies and collective agreements. I can create new positions within the existing budget, so I can't just create a whole new department. It has to be within budget. So oftentimes when that happens, I'm coming to council to do it because there's money within the budget, but you can't create positions out of nothing, and oftentimes that will come directly to council. But I do have delegated authority to review the organizational structure, make sure we have the resources where they need to be. I have a duty to undertake labor relations, and we really rely on outside legal advice in the County of Renfrew and assisting us in that. We have 3 collective agreements. I believe they come due in 2023, 2024, and 2027. So just to keep council aware. I'm also the designated head under the Ombudsman Act. So if somebody calls the provincial ombudsman due to an issue involving our town, as the head, they come to me first to get the information they need as part of the investigation. It just focuses the process to me. I also am responsible for insurance with the treasurer and to deal with claims to a certain amount and deal with legal proceedings associated with claims. So very heavy on risk management, HR, and labor relations as part of that. In terms of the treasurer, as Aaron outlined, based on the powers outlined in the Municipal Act, you'll see a number of staff are able to review and approve agreements, so the legal agreements we enter into after we brought an issue to council. Budget transfers, so this is all money that has been approved. So for instance, less than 100,000. So say we, in the 2023 budget, we approved two $2 million roads. One is $50,000 under budget, one's $50,000 over budget, but you approve the roads. Aaron has the authority to say, okay, that one's under, this one's over. We'll transfer the money and we'll inform standing committee that we've done that and those two roads can proceed. It's as simple as that. We're not going out of our way to find money that hasn't been budgeted. It's really in terms of that. And then also within operating budgets. So we under budgeted on oil. We over budgeted on the cell bills. She moves a little bit of money from the cell line to the fuel line and informs council and standing committee that that was done. So that's just so that the day-to-day operations can continue. Anything that's way over budget and we can't find the money, it's brought to council's attention. For instance, on oil and gas, in the last council, Aaron did a report to committee informing them that we were about $50,000 over budget on oil and gas, and that we would try to find the savings to offset it. And then extension and repayment agreements. So if somebody needs to pay us money back or they haven't paid their taxes and they enter into an agreement to get caught up on their taxes, that is delegated to the treasurer. That involves a high degree of confidentiality, and it's best to be left with the treasurer. Assessment review board hearings, that's if somebody's questioning their assessment. Tax rebate programs that might exist, and then write-offs less than $50,000. So we budget annually for write-offs. Those are bad accounts that can't be collected. Jim died. Jim owes us $30,000. He has no heirs that we know of. So Erin would do a report where she would summarize any write-offs, but I don't think we avoid write-offs at all cost. The clerk, you're required to have a treasurer, you're required to have a clerk. Victoria, and I should say this also applies to deputy clerks and deputy treasurers. So Mitchell Ferguson, who recently joined us from Admison Bromley, is our deputy treasurer. Our deputy clerk is Carolyn. So the authorities that are given to those statutory roles are also extended to deputies. So the clerk reviews and approves agreements. She's able to correct clerical errors in bylaws, agreements, and reports. And she talked about MFIPA, so those are access to information. Those are dealt with routinely across the province by municipal clerks, and that is the same thing in our policy. Department heads are responsible for ensuring they have the departmental policies in place in order to make sure they happen, and they can be called guidelines or procedures, but they're responsible for those, including agreements. Sponsorship and advertising that is $10,000 or less are delegated to staff. I should point out, though, that they're in the budget. So Jordan and I were talking today about advertising at Mattaway being about $40,000. So there is an item in the budget, and we would report to Standing Committee semi-annually on our advertising and sponsorship revenue. The department heads, because there's a number of them that could approve a temporary road closure. Mike might do it in a construction project. Mike, on this side of the room, might do it because of a fire, so they have delegated authority to close a road. And we've also, the last term of council, anytime somebody wanted to use Low Square, it required a motion from council. We've delegated that authority to Eric as Director of Planning with our Economic Development Officer, Dan. So when the BIA wants to do Halloween and Low Square, that won't be brought to council. We'll inform you of it, but we trust that they'll be able to ascertain which activities should be allowed in Low Square and those that shouldn't. And Mike Aslin, as the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works, can release easements with the consent of the clerk, erect signs, traffic lights, street lights, and street furniture. So again, most of those things are within the budget, but if a street light needs to be replaced, we're not coming back to council to say we're going to replace a street light. If it was budgeted for and needs to happen, Mike has the delegated authority to do it. Any questions on delegation of authority?
Council? Hearing none?
So you'll start seeing those semi-annually at the standing committees, and I'm to report quarterly on my items, and I will be doing quarterly updates of my activities, and you'll start seeing that as standing committees start to meet those reports. You're going to see on a routine basis at standing committee. And one of the items that's covered in the procurement policy is large capital items over 100,000. You will get regular updates on those large ticket capital items, regular updates on their status, their budget, change orders. Those will be coming to standing committees as well. So if you're on environment, infrastructure, and public works, you'll get the road projects. If you're on Parks and Rec, you'll get the update on Mattaway, which is greater than $100,000. It's a multi-million-dollar project. You'll get those updates at committee. So those are recent changes we're implementing as a staff team. So moving on to the procedural bylaw, Carolyn and Victoria will carry us through that last part.
Okay, thank you, CEO Tremblay. So under the procedural bylaw, again, required by the Municipal Act, all municipalities are required to have a procedural bylaw, which governs the details and the proceedings of both council and committee meetings. And this kind of allows us to stay organized with our proceedings, as well as it sets a set of rules, right, for all kind of staff and council to follow. It's worth noting that despite the fact that rules are very important, instances may occur where we would need to kind of waive the rules. So we can do this as part of the Municipal Act. It does say we can do this with 2/3 of majority vote. Okay, so everything that you read in the procedural bylaw, again, if we need to, we can amend it. There's a number of definitions that you'll see, well, there's a number of definitions in the bylaw itself that are worth reading. 3 that I'm going to highlight kind of right here in the slides. One is the definition of committee. So committee itself needs to comprise of at least 50% of members of council. Okay, so not everything is a committee, right? So you'll see the working groups that we've advised and everything else. Again, not all meetings or all groups or committees. What a meeting is itself. So a meeting must have quorum, and it must be held on the purpose of advancing business and making decisions. So it's not just a get-together for fun. And then the standing committee itself. So we are proposing for standing committees, which CAO Tremblay will speak to later in his upcoming report. Basically, I just want to state that each of those standing committees have their own terms of reference, and the standing committees will provide kind of advice and recommendation to council on matters that are within their jurisdiction, so within their terms of reference. Okay, and then duties of council within a council meeting. Basically, your duty, right? We've already talked about some of that already, but during a council meeting is to deliberate on the business submitted to council. Okay, vote when a motion is put to vote, and respect the rules of procedure. So pretty straightforward there. Then going into the procedural bylaw outlines kind of the meetings and what those entail. So regular meeting of council will consist of 2 meetings every month. So the second Tuesday and the fourth Tuesday of every month, with the exception of July, where we'll have no meetings, and 1 meeting in December, okay, unless otherwise noted, which sometimes something comes up where we have to move something. We will make that very clear both to staff, council, and the public. Okay, special meetings, those are when something irregular happens and needs to be addressed. So for whatever reason, it can't be held within our normal time frame of the 2nd and the 4th. Council orientation is a good example of that. We have to meet more frequently, so these extra meetings are considered special meetings. Okay, and then emergency meetings, that's exactly what it stated. And it's emergency. It's called because there's an emergency happening. I believe in the pandemic, there was an emergency council meeting. There's other examples where there is something quite important happening. And they're not necessarily subject to all regular protocol, right? They're called at last minute. They're not normally given the proper public notice, et cetera. Okay. Also, the whole goal, and I know you guys all stand very strongly for this, is to be open and transparent. Okay, that's paramount. So all meetings, including our standing committees, are going to be open to the public and broadcast on the town YouTube channel. It's important that all items that are being discussed in these meetings are included on the agenda, which is published at least 48 hours in advance of the meeting. Okay, so it's important that those remain open to the public and that we can, and that the public knows what's being discussed, which is why when we have an agenda, those items are what we would stick to, and we're not throwing extra items on. And then there are times when items that need to be discussed, they go into a closed session, okay? And the Municipal Act speaks very clearly about what is defined and what can be spoken to in a closed session and why we would close. So I've listed those, actually, those are listed on the slide. There's a number of different ones. Again, they're all set out in the Municipal Act. A couple that I'm most familiar with because I've been part of, or I've seen them happen more frequently, and I'll just kind of highlight those. So personal matters about an identifiable person or employee. So say an employee's health status or something to do with their employment. A proposed or pending acquisition or deposition of land. So the purchase of selling or purchasing land. Labor relations or employee negotiations. So confidential HR policies, union negotiations, grievances. Okay, litigation or potential litigation, so related to a specific threat. So it can't just be a hypothetical, it's more of something that we have been made aware of or that is coming forward, so something potentially with a contractor or a maintenance standard. I don't want to say the word, but slip and fall, something that is brought to our attention. And then with kind of that too is also the advice that is subject to a solicitor-client privilege. So a meeting with a lawyer, whether the lawyer is in person or whether we have something, a legal opinion in writing from a lawyer to discuss. Okay, so it's not somebody just relaying information, but it's actually the lawyer speaking directly or in writing. Okay. Oh, and sorry, and then also, which is fairly relevant at this time, is training of a new member of council. So again, we want to try to make sure everything is done as openly as possible, and all information, as we're doing right now, is being shared in a public forum. But there are going to be times when there's some confidential information that we need to discuss in closed for training purposes. Okay. And I think the last thing on the slide before I hand it over to Clerk Charbonneau is the curfews of council and standing committees. So it is outlined that in the procedural bylaw that the curfew for council is a 4-hour meeting and a 3-hour meeting for committees. Now again, with a 2/3 vote to extend, that can be waived, but I'll let you gentlemen decide that.
Great. Okay, so just so you know, we're on the last 2 slides, so hang in there. So moving forward, we're just going to go over the electronic meetings. We encountered a lot of electronic meetings consistently over the COVID pandemic, so we've articulated our processes there along with our other municipal counterparts. They allow for you, within our procedural bylaw, they allow you to attend electronically, but you must attend in person at least once every 60 days. We do encourage in person, but understand that life happens and situations occur where you're not able to be physically present. So if you're able to join us electronically, we welcome that, just as long as you're in person once every 60 days. When you're joining us electronically, you have the same rights and privileges as someone who is here in our physical space. And in closed, we ask in our procedural bylaw that you attend the closed session in a private setting. So you're not in the middle of your living room with your wife or kids reading a book behind you. All of the matters discussed in closed session are private and confidential and for yourself only. And then when you vote, you use the raised hand feature. You identify yourself at the beginning of the meeting and upon the call of every vote, and we'll refer to you electronically and hear you that way. Pecuniary interest. Say that 3 times fast. You'll be well versed on this by your end of term of council. So again, pecuniary interest, as discussed previously, involves money, including that of a spouse, child, or parent. So it's also commonly interchanged with conflict of interest, which isn't correct. And to speak to CAO Tremblay's point, we will be visited by Tony Fleming, the Integrity Commissioner, and he'll be able to ascertain the difference between the two, really help you understand the ins and outs of that. So again, pecuniary interest involves money, and you declare this orally prior to consideration of the matter at the meeting. So you declare it publicly and before we hit that item and discuss it on the agenda. So also to follow up on that and prior to the meeting, you would disclose that in writing. So you'd contact myself or Deputy Clerk Eric at the Clerk's Department. We have a form that you fill out, and we also post this online publicly. So again, it's just that open, transparent form of government. And so on this matter, you are not to attempt to influence or question the question, and including other members of council or staff, you simply remove yourself from the matter completely. And when we are in open session, you simply remove yourself from the table, and in close, you leave the room, so as you are not to hear the matter in which you have that pecuniary interest. And if you're absent and the matter comes up, you declare it at your first opportunity. So again, we'll go into that with greater detail when we have Mr. Fleming join us, but it is a very important, it's a very important interest that you need to adhere to and do to the best of your ability and knowledge, declare as soon as you can. And again, we're in our first council meeting now, but there will be some heated debates, I'm sure, as the term continues. And when this happens, you're able and willing to express yourself and your point of view for your constituents, but you're always to do so in a respectful manner. And you'll always address the chair, so that'll be the mayor or presiding officer. So in the mayor's absence, it's likely the reeve. They'll be considered the presiding officer. And you're to have no longer than 5 minutes and no more than 3 times on a matter of debate. And we have a fancy new clock at the back there, and it actually has a timer feature that I am very excited about. So we will adhere to that. I just have to look at Mr. Mayor. I'll press this button and we can all see how much time we have. So the beauty of technology. So again, just no longer than 5 minutes and no more than 3 times for the issue of debate. Moving forward, point of order. So this relates to a breach of the rules of the procedural bylaw. So if there was a member not adhering, you would call for a point of order. And you will be provided with a copy of the procedural bylaw. I strongly encourage you to review it at length and know it in and out. I'm here to answer any questions during the meetings. That's my role if there's a question regarding the procedural. So I do encourage you to look it over. It's just been recently amended, so it's fairly updated, and just know that inside and out. And if you forget, I'm here to call upon. Point of privilege, this relates to a breach of a member of council or council's rights of immunities, council's rights, immunities, integrity. So it's the questioning of actions taken by a member, so you would do that under a point of privilege. So last slide, drum roll. We're moving forward to voting. Everybody gets to vote, including the presiding officer, AKA the mayor. There are no abstentions, so if you abstain to vote, it's counted as a no. And then a tie vote is a lost vote. So we don't have secret ballots. You generally show your hands to support the matter. You can request a recorded vote. So this isn't something that's done frequently. However, if council or a member of council wishes to have the vote recorded publicly, that essentially I have a piece of paper, I record, and I go through each of you and ask for your decision on vote. And then that is obviously relayed through our Zoom platform, and then it is also noted individually in our minutes. So we'll see who voted yay, who voted nay on a specific matter at hand. And there's no proxy voting, so you must vote for yourself in person. So motions, resolutions, bylaws. Motions are a statement of intent, moved and seconded, and there's no seconder at committees. So if you look to your agenda, for example, the motions are highlighted as a recommended action. And then once those are adopted, it becomes a resolution. So you'll see in the minutes, the resolutions are the motions that are adopted by council on a matter. So bylaws, for anything that we are required to pass as a council through bylaw, those are reflected, and then the confirmatory bylaws. So this is a bylaw that's passed at the end of every meeting, and it confirms the proceedings we're adhered to at the meeting that are in compliance with our legislative rights and abilities. Procedural, as Carolyn stated, we can extend the meeting, follow on through the procedural bylaw to postpone or defer to a certain day or time, and one amendment at a time and debatable. So again, we go through those one at a time. And the agendas. So you'll see through our eScribe platform and through our procedural bylaw, we are to have our agendas out the Thursday before the meeting occurs. So we circulate this to yourselves. We circulate the agenda to all staff and media contacts as well. And we also post the agenda online on our municipal calendar. And this is to be at least 48 hours prior to the meeting to give the public a decent amount of time to look at it prior and be knowledgeable of what's being discussed at the next meeting. And delegations, from time to time, we have interested parties from the public that wish to bring a matter to council, to bring it to your attention, perhaps gain your support, or the town's involvement in whatever they are championing. And again, the fancy timer, 10 minutes. It's up to the mayor's discretion, of course. Typically, the 10-minute limit is for the presentation, and then questions, comments can ensue after that. And typically, we like to see delegations go to committee first. Sometimes they come directly to council. And so you may see a delegation at a committee meeting, you may see it at council, and we go from there. And that is the last slide. Questions, comments?
Councillor Legree?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just want to thank the CEO and his team for putting this council orientation together. Most of us on here are new, with the exception of a couple, and it's really good information for us to get our feet in, and so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Andrew Dick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to regarding all meetings are to be open to the public. However, closed session is possible for one of these exceptions, and then you have a list of exceptions. So does that mean it's possible that we're going into a closed session, or we're 100% going into a closed session with all these?
So we're legislated by the Municipal Act to go in for various reasons. We can only go in for those reasons. So it's pretty strict on what we're allowed to disclose or what we're allowed to discuss in closed. It's to deter going in for reasons that the public should be able to have access to.
And most of them are discretionary, so there are two noted in the slide that Carolyn covered, an MFIPA, but those are delegated to the clerk, so you won't see those generally. And a report from the ombudsman must go enclosed, and it must be enclosed. All the other ones you don't have to. But I would say, like solicitor-client privilege, there won't be a lawyer that will say, hey, yeah, tell the public what I told you. They usually won't waive privilege, which means we probably can't deal with it in open. In the good old days, appointments, we would do appointments in closed. Should we name Betty to that committee? Should John go on that committee? What you'll likely see here is you'll see a report and we'll do the appointments in open. I have a mentor who would be very upset if we go in closed a lot. We've had a lot of legal HR issues that we've dealt with. It's very appropriate. You're allowed to go in closed, but we should try when we can to not go in. But there are some very specific reasons. If you're giving us directions for a negotiation, either with the collective, through a collective agreement for negotiations, or to buy a piece of property and you tell us offer 10,000 or offer us 20,000, you don't want that out in the public. You want to preserve your bargaining ability. So it's usually very kind of serious stuff. And a change that's in the procedural bylaw is we'll go in closed at council. So we used to allow closed meetings at standing committee. No longer, those will come to council because it's important that all 7 of you get the same information at the same time. So anything of that nature that's serious enough that we would have to go in closed. 2 good examples as part of your orientation. We're going to give you a legal update on any claims or legal matters that are underway. You're going to get that in closed. You're going to get an HR update on things that are ongoing that involve people. That will be enclosed. So we're not obligated to. Only few exceptions we're obligated to, but when we do, it's usually serious. Yeah.
Thank you guys for answering that question. Thanks.
Any other questions? Revimo?
Worship, through you to staff, 2 questions, but just a comment on the closed. It will be listed with a description on the agenda, and sometimes they'll even cite what it is and give you, anybody with an educated guess sometimes can guess what it's about just simply by putting it together. But there will be a brief description on the open agenda prior to going into close. So, the public will know that we went into close generally for what nature. And so my 2 questions, please, through you, your worship, to the clerk is, a friendly amendment, is that an actual term? I'm sure we've all heard that either on TV or Law and Order or some movie, or even sitting through council meetings about friendly amendments. And I'm curious if that is an actual term, or is that a make-believe wish?
I may defer to CAO Tremblay on that. He's probably more articulate in that fact than I am.
It's only friendly if people are smiling while they're moving it. No. So usually if the mover and seconder agree to the amendment, we would deem that friendly. Depending on the council, sometimes that doesn't happen very often, and we will have an amendment to the amendment, and you would deal with the, let's buy fruit, and then Reeve Emo says, I think we should buy oranges. Let's amend the motion to specify which type of fruit we're going to buy, and everybody's like, oh, come on. We all know we want to buy oranges. Councillor McWhirter and Councillor McDonald, you moved and seconded that we're buying fruit. Is it okay if we change it to oranges to be specific? And you're like, yeah, whatever. So I would say usually that's what a friendly amendment is. It's kind of like through debate, everybody's kind of at a consensus of that tweak to a motion. It doesn't often happen. We hope that we clarify it before we get there. But so it's really if the mover and seconder are in agreement, and if it's kind of considered minor. So it has to be in keeping with the intent of what we're trying to do and not a completely different thing. It has to be very related to the matter at hand.
Thank you. And I think cherry blossoms are actually a fruit and a delicacy. My second question is, some agendas that we've seen in other jurisdictions have a statement at the bottom that says all documents presented, or as protection to delegations, all documents that are presented are considered public. And is that something we would consider? And I apologize, when we did this a month ago, I never thought of that. But is that something when we revise the procedural bylaw in the future we might add?
That's a great question, and yes, we can certainly look to adding that. And as a practice, what we do is when they're provided publicly, we typically add them in with the minutes so they're accessible to the public and accessible upon request as well from the Clerk's Department.
Any other questions, Council? Great. Well, thank you very much to the staff that put this together, the Clerk's Department, the Treasury. I know you guys haven't been very busy lately, so there hasn't been much going on at the town hall and everything, but in all seriousness, though, I know you guys are, going hard at it, and I just want to thank you for that and being able to give council this orientation overview. You look at council, that's a majority of them are new, and I'm like looking at people and they're like, oh, what did we just sign up for? I thought we were just going to change the street or something. So I think just in a little bit of confidence to council, we're very fortunate enough to have CAO Tremblay and his team that have broken it down for the training. And, we're going to be doing the special meetings every other Tuesday to break all this down. And I'm actually looking forward to it because I never got that for the 8 years that we were here. So you guys are going to get a really good understanding by the middle of January what works, how it works, what our roles are, and stuff like that. So I really appreciate that being done. So thank you. Now on to the interesting part, because just a little brief intro here, and he doesn't even know I'm going to do it. We're new. I'm new in this role. And we have a CAO, which is new for the last 8 years. We only had him for, 6 months, I guess. Pretty close.
Nearly 5.
5 months.
Felt like 6.
And now I'm working with a computer with an agenda that I've hardly ever seen before. So bear with me. So I'm just going to bring council's attention down to D.2.1, the support for MTO Connecting Links funding intake 8. The recommendation that Renfrew Town Council support the proposed motion in support of the MTO CL intake 8 funding application for the design and construction of O'Brien Road to Bryan Road, Mask Road, Durango Road. I need a mover and a seconder to receive that report. Moved by Revimo, seconded by Councillor Legree. I will now turn it over to Director Aslan, who will provide the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Sidney and Council, and welcome, Council. Didn't mean to jump into a topic of this significance in your first meeting, but here we are. I will start off in the background section. Many of you may not be familiar. What is a connecting link? So a connecting link is basically a municipal road that connects two ends of a highway system. So for instance, if you look at O'Brien Road, it starts at Highway 17 and connects to Highway 132 and as well the other end of Highway 60 and the other end of town. So you can imagine there's a lot of provincial traffic, a lot of transport trucks doing business about the province using our municipal roads. And for that ability to use the roads within Renfrew as part of a highway network, we have entered into an agreement with the Ministry of Transportation to operate a connecting link highway. So what that does is they recognize that since there are a lot of provincial users using these types of road systems, that they do provide a subsidy or compensation to the municipality up to 90% of eligible works, like road works, curbs, storm drainage systems, to correct connecting link or road system deficiencies on these connecting links. And they cap the funding to $3 million for road projects and $5 million for a bridge. So the town of Renfrew has 6.8 kilometers of connecting links as part of Highway 60 and Highway 132. Now, when you compare that to the total of 352 kilometers of connecting link in the province, that means we have 2% of the province's connecting links, which is not insignificant. And the MTO commit $30 million in funding towards connecting link projects in each year. And what they do is they have funding intakes, which every year in about October, they come out and say, okay, we have an intake for a funding application, and then the municipalities put together their needs and set forth an application if it's supported by council. So this particular section of road is O'Brien Road from Mask to Wrangler. And that's just adjacent to the section we're working on now, O'Brien Road from Gillen to Mask. So the town has been on a connecting link rehabilitation program since probably 1998, and we did approach the province, and Revimo is aware of that the Minister Del Duca was invited to Renfrew, where we proposed a connecting link rehabilitation program to them. And it was going to be a multi-year program that the municipality would work with the province to basically try to, gain enough money to basically rebuild our connecting links through town. And with each project, there is a grant of $3 million. So the town, the report here identifies all of the different sections that we have been successful in receiving funding, and it's quite significant when you look at it. So right now we're at our last phase of our Connecting Link Rehabilitation Program, and that's the section of O'Brien Road from Mass to Wrangler. And we did the project estimates and some preliminary engineering, and it's about $4.941 million in work, and that includes some contingencies of 15% contingencies. It also includes inflation, because if this is approved to submit for application and we receive the funding, then we'll go into a design phase, which will be in 2023, and then we'll prepare tenders, and it'll go to construction in 2024, and it'll be finalized in 2025. So these are long-term projects, and the value of the money in 2024 and 25 will not be what it is today. So even though we're estimating what the cost is, we've added some inflationary dollars. The asset management system in town has identified that the town does require provincial and federal funding to be able to rehabilitate its assets. There's too many needs, and we have such limited funding sources from municipal taxation to be able to do it on our own. So being able to obtain any provincial and federal funding is very, very significant. And in this particular case, the $3 million in funding constitutes 60.7% of the project value. Okay, so that's a fairly heavy subsidy to the project, and the application does require a resolution of support from council to have council support this application that has been submitted. So the application was due in November 16th, and we did submit the application one day early. And the application, just to give you some reference, the application constitutes this thickness of materials. So this includes some preliminary engineering from designs from our designers. It includes geotechnical evaluations. There's letters of support from the community, all the different agencies, the fire department, Renfrew Power, Sunshine Coach, and we have this consultation process in our applications that has led to us being successful on many of these applications. So I guess tonight we're looking for council support of this funding application, intake 8 to the MTO, which has been submitted. If council feels differently about the project, then we would advise the ministry. The most controversial part of the whole project is the entrance, where right at Wrangler and O'Brien there's a proposed roundabout. Okay, now that roundabout was considered as part of an environmental assessment. So on major infrastructure works like a collector road, the province requires us to go through a municipal environmental assessment process, and it's quite an extensive process in itself, where we have to identify what the issues are. We have to look at all the different options to solve the problem. We have to look at the environmental impacts, the economic, the social impacts, and basically present. We have to have mandatory public consultation to determine the options and get public feedback and respond to that in the environmental assessments. So that work was done in 2015 to consider the Hall Avenue extension, which will lead from the existing Gillen Road and Hall Avenue. It'll go through the Huntergate subdivision and join up in behind Canadian Tire, and ultimately outlet at the Wrangler Road and O'Brien Road intersection. Now, roundabouts, they're becoming quite common. If you look at Aylmont, the main entrance into Aylmont has a roundabout. There's North Grenville also has a roundabout. If you travel into Ottawa, they're becoming very, very common. If you think about it, there's no stop and goes, there's no lineups, there's no waiting at intersections to wait for the light to turn green. Pedestrian access is free flow around the roundabouts. So there's a lot of very, very positive attributes to roundabouts. There's a lot of public perception that roundabouts are going to be problematic if drivers haven't experienced them. But there are many, many benefits. When the power goes out, they still function. There's no operation and maintenance costs for traffic signals, greenhouse gas. Yeah, one of the main things with with a roundabout is that it slows traffic down but keeps it moving. So there's very minimal or less consequential impacts and collisions, and everybody's going slow. So if there is a collision, it's like a minor collision as opposed to somebody getting T-boned at a traffic intersection, which can be very hazardous for the drivers. So anyway, having said that, this is quite a large issue, and I would anticipate that the councillors may have some questions, but staff is recommending that council support this motion or this report, and continue with the last phase of our Connecting Link Rehabilitation Program, which is a very significant milestone for the community. And I think if you're driving down the roads today, you drive down Stewart Street and the main street, and you can see the improvements of the quality of the roads that are being constructed, mainly with a lot of support from the provincial government. So any questions? I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to jump in here. This is just to approve applying for $3 million. I had a very good question from a councillor on the weekend. This is not approving Treasurer Broom going out to find $1.9 million tomorrow. This is just to send it to the government to see if we get it. So just so we know. So any questions? Revimo.
Just a quick question and a statement. The question, should we be preparing for, as we become more urbanized and larger, should we, in some of these projects, be preparing for the installation of wiring for CCTV, just as a security measure in the future? And then my general statement is I'm supportive of this. As Director Asselin noted, we did have then Minister Del Duca come to Renfrew County to talk about Highway 17 and the extension. And while he was here, I was chairing the meeting, so I'd spoken to Director Asselin about preparing a plan and a presentation to show that, first of all, Renfrew would be ready when 417 came past our door. At that time, we didn't have any sense of when it was going to happen. But we recognized that we were going to have to invest significant dollars in our entranceway to move traffic through the community. And so that he put together an excellent plan, and we've stuck to it. And I believe the timelines are pretty close to what we predicted, even though we didn't know that Highway 17 was going to be here towards the end of this decade. And so we, in good faith, we've produced this plan. I've spent some time educating the ministry and staff about the plan and about how it also intersects with their significant investment. They've made significant investments in Highway 60 and in Highway 132 at the same time, I think in preparation for 417, but also to meet what we've accomplished. And so when you take a look at it, it's about $25 million to date spent in our community on this Connecting Link series of highways. And I believe, if my math is correct, of that 25 million, we've received in the neighborhood about 18 million to do the projects. The biggest gap was the Raglan Street, Main Street, where we had to finance 7 million of that. Thank you.
Councillor McCord?
First, I'd like to say good on you, Mike, and your staff for being proactive, realizing that there's a bit of a gap between councils, and there was a timeline that had to be done, so good on you. It's an interesting project. I have a couple of questions. First, Wrangler and Mask with a roundabout. Any implication on transports trying to get through that, or?
So the roundabout will be at Wrangler and O'Brien Road, that intersection, and the designs of the roundabouts are fully like they've evolved over time. So what they do is the center of the roundabout is actually, will have sort of a lot of it that's passable for trailers. So the vehicles, like the truck, will sort of follow around the lane, and the trailer will kind of go across the center of the roundabout, like sort of just in a prepared pattern, and it's basically they're designed to accommodate the trailers and the truck traffic. So that has been they work quite well, and the transport drivers are used to that kind of roundabout.
Okay, good, because I've been asked about it before. Also, as far as the what we're doing tonight, it's just like you said, it's just putting through the vote that we want to pursue this. We can always things go bad or things aren't looking good, we can always stop later when it comes to financing. There are other revenues for financing. Some of them have been listed here. I'm assuming we would do water and sewage, so some of the funding would come out of the water.
Yes, so when we do a project like that, we prepare some preliminary engineering based on the road functions. In that particular area, there's not a lot of water and sewer, local infrastructure there. We do have a couple of mains that go down the road. So we look at whether or not there's any improvements to the sanitary and the storm so there will be some significant storm improvements there. The water is less significant improvements, but there may be some. And when we get into the detailed design of the project, that's where we would identify the water and the wastewater components. And those components we would have to fund totally on our own.
But that would come out of the water sewage.
Yes, that's correct. And the Water and Sewer Fund have some funds for capital improvements associated with other projects. I think the most significant is we are submitting an application now to the ministry. And if the ministry comes back, and usually it's in March of next year, and they will say, and at that time they'll say, okay, you've been successful. Okay, we do not want to respond to the province saying, oh, we applied, but we weren't really serious, so we're not going to go ahead with the project. So there is some pressure in providing this resolution now that once you get into the announcements, that the town will pursue the design, and there's an anticipation that after the design we'll proceed to construction. Now, through the design process and the construction process, we're going to get engineering estimates on the project, and we may come to you and say, we estimated this project to be 4.9 million, but geez, we're estimating it to be 6 million now. We would then approach council and say, this is what we can do. Okay, we can modify the project slightly to not affect the eligible components that are going to get us the $3 million. But maybe stage some of the, the last stage, we reduced the size of the park and ride. We removed one section of sidewalk. We did a few things like that because the project was over budget, and we still wanted to proceed, but we couldn't proceed with the full amount because it would cost us too much, right? So there will be milestones both at the design stage where we get to review the cost, and prior to going to tender. And then when we do put it out to tender, the tenders will be received, we'll evaluate them, and council will be involved in that process to award a construction contract. And at that time, we give you the options, that the cost is this is the scope. The options are to reduce the scope and do this work for this much money, or do the full scope with the extra money. And then we talk with Erin, the treasurer, and she would give you the options on identifying where the funds would come from, and all the different options there. And if there's borrowing costs, we would probably identify what the borrowing costs are, things like that. I think what we've determined is that if you do a project in 3 or 4 years from now, it's going to be 20 or 25% more expensive than doing it today. So there is some urgency, or there's some cost benefit to doing the project, getting it out of the way. I say as well, not to carry on, but the projects that we have been doing, we have enough professional guidance and geotechnical that if the road base is not suitable, we're going to go in there and fix it, such that we're going to end up with infrastructure that lasts 40 or 50 years with maybe an overlay required after 20 or something. But we're looking to build the infrastructure such that we're not spending a lot of money trying to keep it in good shape after. It's well designed, meets the standard, and is more efficient to maintain it through its life cycle.
Okay, so voting tonight then is actually voting with an assumption we're doing it, and there's always a possibility things could change down the road once we do an assessment.
Yeah, there's nothing guaranteed in infrastructure work other than it's going to cost money, and you'll have many points of contact with council to award engineering contracts, to award the construction contracts, and we'll give you full details on the options and what council's options are to fund different components of the project.
Okay, that's great. I just wanted these other gentlemen to be aware it's not always cut and dry.
No, rarely.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Sobolski?
Thank you, Mayor Sidney. In regard to the roundabout, I'm in favor, and I'm in favor of what we're going to do tonight, but looking at the cost of traffic lights compared to roundabout that's outlined here, and just thinking in distribution of traffic flow, we're going to put this new state-of-the-art roundabout in as the first obstacle, and then we're going to follow it up with a brand-new street light, followed by another street light, another street light. It doesn't seem the distribution is going to happen smoothly. Have we looked at a second roundabout instead of another street light? Does the design have the opportunity to modify as we continue this process for this part of the project?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and the roundabout was mainly part of a transportation link for the Hall Avenue extension, right? So in the future, there will be a very significant amount of traffic sort of veering off to the north to take the Hall Avenue extension, and that was the basis for the roundabout at the Wrangler Road and O'Brien intersection. We are currently in the works of doing the master transportation plan, and the master transportation plan, it's going to be complete by the end of 2023, and we're going to be looking at basically all options for all intersections, in the remainder of town. And there may be recommendations to move to roundabouts in different locations, maybe Confusion Corner or right at the Hall Avenue Veterans Memorial. But certainly there'll be discussions. We know that the works that we're constructing now is not the 50-year solution. It's basically we're building now what's going to be good for like 20 years. And there's opportunities to, even in our application, we've sort of said, we're building a 2-lane roundabout now, but eventually that'll be a 4-lane section. So when we build the road platform, we're going to build it such a way that it could be accommodated into 4 lanes in the future. But at this time, the Mask Road intersection is proposed to be signalized just to replace what's there, and will be looked at through the master transportation plan if there's better options, and maybe even through the design, if we end up with that being sort of a design solution for, like, during the design of this project, then we'll be looking at considering that as well.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Councillor Anderdick?
So, Mike, this is great. Like, I actually understand it, which is nice. I wanted to touch base with what Councilman Sobolski said, so I'm glad he asked that question. So again, just so my brain works right here on this, we're just voting for you to go ahead and do your thing. Will we have an opportunity to come back and really question a lot of this stuff? Or once we vote tonight and say, yeah, we want you to go ahead and apply for the funding, is that it, cut and dry, these are the plans, this is what we're doing?
No, that's a good question as well. And this is not a final design. I think the premise of a roundabout at Wrangler and O'Brien, I think that's sort of fixed in a sense. That was determined through an environmental assessment. That is a very rigorous process. So there's justification to continue on that route. I said if you want, if council doesn't support a roundabout there, then what we should do is probably put on the brakes a bit and maybe do the work of the master transportation plan. And once that's done, then we can, make application for, for something. But I think in 2015, there was a very comprehensive environmental assessment done to support that. That was the recommended solution. There was public consultation involved, and that report is available for you to, it's about this thick again. It was well done. It was prepared by the same consultant that's doing the master transportation plan. So there will be various elements of the project that are going to be refined through the final design, like the actual lane configurations. Another thing with the Mask intersection is the right turns and the ins and outs to the Walmart property. I think those will be enhanced quite significantly through the design, where there's going to be specific turning lanes, various that to get the traffic really flowing well into that development. So the Mask intersection won't have as much kind of traffic as the O'Brien Wrangler Road, but certainly there would be lots of points to refine the design. We're going to have 2 public meetings through the design period, so that we'll invite council out to see what the design is looking like. and then they can provide any comments at that time on what the design is looking like.
Thank you so much. Roundabouts, if you've ever been to a sporting event, roundabouts are the way to go. So that's like, I'm excited to see that. And, but I was just scared about some other questions I had, but you know what? Like, I got enough information. I thank Mr. Director Aslan for everything he's given us tonight.
Any other questions? Hearing none. So I'm going to read the motion again and then call for a vote. That Renfrew Town Council support the proposed motion in support of the MTOCL Intake 8 funding application for the design and construction of O'Brien Road from Mask Road to Wrangler Road. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Council. Now, on to the next. I will bring your attention down to D51, the signing authority. The Renfrew Town Council approved the update to signatory authorization for the purpose of banking, and I would like to turn that over to, oh, I need a mover and a seconder first, please. Sadowski and Councilor McWhirter. All in favor? Oh, don't need that. Put that down. Sorry. There's the learning thing. And now I'll turn it over to the treasurer, please.
Thank you, Mayor Sidney. This is a bylaw to simply update the signatory authorization for banking purposes to reflect the newly appointed mayor, as well as the chief administration officer. Our financial institution, Bank of Montreal, requires individuals from the corporation to be identified as having signatory authority on behalf of the corporation, which is approved by council. Historically, signing authority has been provided to the mayor, the reeve, treasurer, deputy treasurer, and clerk. With the new term of council seated, the signing authority requires updating to reflect the newly appointed mayor, as well as a CAO. Thank you.
Any questions? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, Council. On to D.5.2, governance, that Renfrew Town Council approved the establishment and terms of reference of the following standing committees: Economic Development, Planning and Tourism, Environment, Infrastructure and Public Works, Recreation, Fire and Protective Services, and Strategic Priorities and Corporate Services. Do I have a mover and a seconder?
We can do them all as one big motion.
Okay.
If you keep reading.
Oh,
Yeah.
What?
2, 3, yeah, 2, 3, 4, and 5 left.
oh, do them all?
Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, perfect. So that was number one. Number two, the Renfrew Town Council approve the 2023 meeting calendar for standing committees and council. And number three, that Renfrew Town Council approve the establishment of the following working groups and task force with staff directed to prepare terms of reference for council consideration. They are the Mayor's Task Force on Growth, Readiness, and Highway Expansion, inclusive, age-friendly, and barrier-free community working group, and a signature events working group. 4, that Renfrew Town Council directs staff to request shareholder meetings for Renfrew Hydro Incorporated and Renfrew Power Generation Incorporated, and further, the council endorse the appointment of Mayor Tom Sidney and Renfrew Power Generation Incorporated in replacement of former Councillor Jameson, and further still that Renfrew Hydro Inc. be informed of a town's future request to have Mayor Tom Sidney and Reeve Peterimo serve on its board of directors. And number 5, that Renfrew Town Council direct staff to review the business improvement area bylaws within 60 days with a view of strengthening the BIA's collaboration with the town, ensure compliance with the provisions of the Municipal Act, and to review potential boundary changes for the district. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Sobalski, Councillor Dick. I will turn it over to our CAO Tremblay to fill us all in.
I'll start with a friendly amendment, just to put you to the test. I did send out an amended 2023 meeting calendar. The committees that are scheduled for 10 a.m. are just being flipped from weeks. So based on the clerk survey and people's interest in serving on those bodies. So the Strategic Priorities and Corporate Services Committee would actually meet on the 3rd Tuesday at 10 a.m. And the Environment, Infrastructure and Public Works meeting would meet on the 1st Tuesday at 10 a.m. So if the mover and seconder, Councillor Councillors Cebulski and Dick are okay, Clause 2 would be changed to note as amended in terms of the meeting calendar. So I think they're saying yes?
You guys are okay with that? Great,
Okay.
thank you.
Good. So standing committees do important work. They are the ones that are doing kind of the detailed, heavy lifting on the matters of substance. We have a number of operating departments, so these committees might include one department. So in the case of Environment, Infrastructure, and Public Works, all those areas are within Director Aslin's team. But if you look at Recreation, Fire, and Protective Services, we'll have both Director Wall and Director Guest's team report through to that one committee. We feel that these 4 committees allow each member of council to serve on 2 standing committees, and with the meeting calendar allow that matters going to one standing committee then rise to council, and then and so on and so forth. So they cover all areas of municipal operations, and the terms of reference set out kind of the terms of what's within those teams. Based on conversations with the mayor in terms of his leadership and the issues that he feels this council should be tackling, the 2 working groups and the 1 task force hit on those 3, and they're outlined with direction for us to do detailed terms of reference to bring that back. It is anticipated that the mayor's task force on growth readiness and highway expansion would have the mayor, the reeve, and an additional member of council. That the working group on inclusion, age-friendly, and barrier-free community would have would be led by 1 member of council, and that group would really be about dialogue with key components of our community to encourage an inclusive community led by the town. And the signature events working group would be about organizing our signature events, so the 2 that we know well, Bluegrass and the Craft Beer Festival, but as well as a 3rd one. Lastly, the last 2, we have representation on Renfrew Power Generation, Inc. We have 2 members of council that serve on its board, but that is not the case with Renfrew Hydro, Inc. The town is the shareholder for both organizations, so there was some legislative regulatory changes. It all seems like yesterday to me, but I'm trying to think if that was 10 years or so ago. That used to be one entity, and then across the province, power generation has been separated from the other part of the utility. We are the shareholders for both, so what we're requesting is that we have representation on the board for both organizations because they're important to the town and the town's future. And lastly, we have a BIA that has been in existence for a number of years. We want to make sure that it's as productive as possible, that we're fostering good relationships within the businesses, within the BIA, but also that we're looking at its boundaries and determine are they still appropriate, and also make sure that we're compliant with the Municipal Act in terms of their operating bylaws. So we've picked 60 days because their AGM is coming up in February, and this staff have started the review, but just formal direction to go and do that work because the BIA does do important work, but we would just want to make sure that it's operating on all cylinders, everybody's getting along, and that the ties with the town are strong going forward, and that we're compliant with the Municipal Act. So if there are any questions with regard to any elements of the governance structure, I'd be happy to take them. I should note, Mr. Mayor, just in closing, that we have received councillors' preferences for every member of council, so the appointments to these bodies in terms of council appointees will come forward to the next meeting. And I should note that there's also a last section in the report that speaks to outside local boards or groups or agencies where we might have a liaison, and those appointments will be confirmed as well.
Any questions, Council? Revimo?
Thank you. Given the slide that told us that quorum is 50% of council, and now that we have council committees that have 3 members of council plus a mayor, I'm just wondering if you could explain how that's not perceived to be quorum.
So the terms of reference specifically outline the role of standing committees, which is to provide advice to council. So when the mayor attends, he counts. What that does mean, though, it's just endorsing a position that will come forward to council for approval. So that's why terms of reference are really important. They basically specify your kind of step 1 in a 2-step process. And then other bodies, so if 4 of you are appointed to the library board, that's a quorum of council, that becomes complicated. So what our job is as the clerk's team and the CAO is to ensure as we set these bodies up, that we're in conformity with our rules of procedure and we're in conformity with the Municipal Act. But for standing committees, you're only step one. Those recommendations come forward to council. And should something die on a tie vote at committee, it still comes to council, and council will have to make a decision.
Any other questions, council? Just to add to that, once it comes from committee to council, it can be changed, it can be shot down, that's what the CAO is meaning, is that it gets done here. So, with that, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Oh, sorry, you have a question?
We'll get reference material from each of those committees, though, like that we can, what the committee sees, we see, right? Perfect. No, that's good.
Yeah, and I should just note that we changed the procedural bylaw. What would happen would be, and I mean this in as nice a terms, we would regurgitate, the chair would be expected to regurgitate what happened at committee, which I think is a waste of people's time. So we've changed the rules to say everybody will get the agendas, everybody will get the minutes, and the reports the council write will now say, in the case of the report you just dealt with MTO, it'll be recommended that the Environment, Infrastructure and Public Works Committee recommend town council. So the items that require council will come to council, and then everybody can watch the YouTube or read the minutes or read the agenda to be informed on it. We're not going to be regurgitating what necessarily happened at standing committee, just for everybody's time.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, council. Now we'll go on to E1, external boards and county reports. E1, Renfrew Police Services Board minutes of September 14th, 2022. What do we do?
Just noted and filed. Yeah.
So we're good?
Yeah, just for information purposes, so council's aware of the last meeting that we're aware of from the Police Services Board.
And E.2, Renfrew County news release, nomination of the 2023 county warden. Do we want the warden to speak on that? The proposed?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I hadn't prepared anything, so you'll just have to watch me riff off the cuff for a minute. I'm quite honored, to have been acclaimed here in our community with the responsibility of representing our interests, our community, plus the interests of all of Renfrew County at the same time. When I enter those chambers, it's a large undertaking as a corporation, and fortunate to have 16 other members of council that are, or soon to be council, that are quite accomplished. I spent some time getting around to know the people that I didn't know, the 9 new members, and there's quite a diverse collection of backgrounds that's going to be very beneficial to our community. And I don't think it's any surprise that it's going to be a fairly challenging term, and I can let you in on a couple dirty secrets. My agenda will speak tomorrow, and my speech tomorrow will speak about cooperation and shared services, and the expectation that we'll be driving that. We're going to be talking about health. We're going to be talking about homelessness this year, and working with our not-for-profits and assisting them in the work that they do. I think there is some room for some adjustments in services that are delivered by everybody across the county, and I think with the tightening of the purse strings, the expected tightening of the purse strings, we're going to have to do some things quite different with partnerships and memos of understanding, and maybe even some fairly significant shifts in responsibility. So I anticipate it'll be a very interesting year. The warden sits for a year, and then should I wish to or hope to continue, I would stand for election again next year. Fortunately, in the past, I stood 4 years in a row and was successful. The warden, just very quickly, also serves on the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, and the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus represents 13 municipalities, largely rural, with a population of about 1.5 million. And it extends from our northern boundary at de Rivière down to Cornwall, along the river, right over to Prince Edward County, and up into Haliburton County and up to the bottom of Perry Sound and Nipissing District is the boundary. We often go in tandem with the Eastern Ontario Mayor's Caucus. Those are the mayors, they represent the unaligned city of Pembroke, Smith Falls, for instance, Brockville, Cornwall sit at that table, and there are 13 of them. They represent about 780,000 people. So our whole area has about $2.3 million people, which we represent. And one of the biggest projects that we're just finishing up now is through the Eastern Ontario Regional Network, which is owned 100% by the Warden's Caucus, and they're finishing up about a $275 million, $280 million project right now, which is expanding cell coverage in the district covered by the Eastern Ontario Warden's Caucus. That will see approximately 350 new and repurposed towers, so we should be very well covered across our district. We thought we were going to be really covered well when we did the broadband project, completed the broadband project, I believe, in 2014. And we didn't account for everybody in the house, all 5 people watching Netflix at one time, sucking up all the bandwidth. We sure as heck didn't account for COVID. So that that network had to be expanded, and the cell project should do that. So it's a very exciting time. I'm very happy to be doing it, and I really enjoy it. And it's going to mean some absences from public events, and I see the 6 of you. I don't think the public will miss me a bit, and so, but I will attend as many as I can. I don't miss many meetings. I may take advantage of the Zoom function. I've done that a couple of times from sitting in a hotel room in Toronto between meetings at a variety of committee meetings, and I'll try not to do that too often. But so I certainly appreciate the support of the mayor and staff and yourself and our community, and look forward to, as the warden, working with the town of Renfrew to serve our community and develop it. And I just one caveat, the Highway 417 extension was the result of the county taking a lead on it, and I was fortunate enough to chair that committee, but we had great support from all across the community and great support from our 17 municipal partners, plus the city of Pembroke, and John Yakubuski worked his tail off on it as well. So it's just a quick example of how we all work together, even though sometimes it may look like we're in competition. Once we get a straight ahead direction, we run our tails off to get it done. Ontario Winter Games in February is another example, and I'll bring you a report on that sometime in December. So thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Well, everything goes the way it's supposed to tomorrow. The county will be in some very good hands, and I think that would be great. On to confirmation of council minutes. That Renfrew Town Council confirmed the minutes of council dated November 8th and 15th, 2022, and the confidential minutes of November 8th, 2022. Understanding that they remain confidential. Mover and a seconder? Review, Councilor McWhorter, all in favor? Carried. All right. Oh, sorry.
Just with the minutes of November 15th, and maybe it's been picked up, but it says Mayor Edie. I think it should read Mayor Sidney, but anyway.
Yes, that was picked up. It's been corrected.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye.
I missed that.
For information, I'm the bane of the clerk's existence. I sent her a note.
So I'll go down to J, notice of motion. Does anybody have a notice of motion to come to next council meeting? I don't know if you actually know what that is, so maybe the CAO wants to just give a little education piece on that.
So notice of motion is if you want council to do something, you would tell us the general issue and what you intend to bring forward. You don't have to read out the motion. The clerk's office will work with you to draft that, and then that motion comes back under H, motion of which notice has previously been given. So you would say something like, I think that all dogs in the town of Renfrew should be labs. And then you go to Carolyn and Victoria, and they give you a bunch of whereases. Whereas dogs are great, therefore be resolved that all dogs be required to be labs, and that formal wording would come to the next meeting. So I know that sounds like but these things seem complicated, but as you get more used to them, you'll see that they're not, and the staff team are here to help you with the wording. Yeah.
So for an example, past council, I did that to get the speed limit lowered at Hunter Gate. So with support of Councillor Hines at the time, we brought that notice of motion forward, and then council got to debate it, and that's how it went. So if there's something that down the road you feel is important, or if somebody's been, emailing you and you're going to go at it, that's how you do it. Councillor Anderdick?
So are we allowed, and be brutally honest, are we allowed to utilize the staff and go in and say, hey, like, can you help research this? Like, can you pull out, you know what I mean? Are we allowed to do that? Because they're busy.
Yeah, no, certainly. But I think some of the issues you might be getting, we might be working on, and there might already be a policy, might be in the budget. So speaking to staff, so the clerk's team will help you on the formulation of it, but the department heads, and I do not discourage having conversations with them or coming to me to say, hey, I'm concerned about this, can you give me the background? So oftentimes we'll mitigate the issue or help explain it or do some of the research. And we might encourage you to do a notice of motion, say it's an item that's not in the budget and you really want, or will take a lot of time to research. We'll encourage you to do that. So yes, those conversations with staff are pretty important, and we can help you with the history. I'm new as well, but also on the actual formulation, the procedural side of things as well.
Any other questions? Perfect. All right. Now, Al? Just say it. So the motion is that bylaw 98-2022 and bylaw 98-2022 and 100-2022 listed on the agenda of November 22nd, 2022 be taken as read and passed. A mover and seconder. Councillor Legree, Councillor McWhorter, all those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Council. Upcoming meeting, special council meeting, November 29th. We have our council meeting December 6th and December 20th, 2022, 6 p.m. and 5 p.m. next week.
Yeah, next week there will be just a gathering before, just for the end of the year, and then there's also a regular meeting on the 13th. So I apologize, but you're lined up for 4 consecutive meetings. 6 if you count inaugural and tonight. And then you'll have a nice, restful Christmas holiday break.
And then it's 4 in a row after that. Yes, Councilor McCord?
I confirm December 6th is canceled?
No, so the 29th, 6th, and 20th are special meetings, and then the 13th is a regular meeting.
Okay.
So we have all those, and if, I should say to council, if you're unable to be here because of work or you're traveling, that's fine. Sending your regrets to the clerk is important, and then the clerk or the deputy clerk, and they will inform the mayor accordingly to ensure we have quorum.
Is it possible to set up I'm not going to be available that night. Is it possible to set up a one-on-one with Connor or Mike? It's to do with infrastructure, I believe, projects? Is that
Okay.
possible, like a one-on-one during the day for an hour or something? Just so I'm up to speed on everything?
Certainly, I would say, and if any member on any topic would like a detailed conversation, what we'll do is we can share either before or when you come back, we can do that detailed. I understand you might be heavily involved with that committee's work anyway, so there'll be more to talk about. But I would say, yes, we'll provide those materials to you, and then we can follow up either before or after.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right.
And you don't need a motion to adjourn, you can just adjourn.
Really?
Yeah, give you the power.
No way. If there's nothing else, I will adjourn this meeting at 8:13. We are adjourned. Oh, sorry, I got my glasses all fuzzy. Well, that says 13. 15. Thank you, council. Yeah.
You have a question, those pictures?